Good evening. Very warm welcome to St Margaret's. Lovely to have you all with us for our continuing series. Had a really marvellous run of concerts over the last month. We've gone far away to South Africa and even further last week to New Zealand. And this week we're going up north to Scotland, although happily our performer tonight lives locally and works just down the road. So not such a commute for him. But wonderful to have Joe for the first time. So would you please give a really warm St Margaret's welcome to Joe?
Good afternoon. Does it work? Yes, okay, great. Thank you very much for coming to this concert. Especially nice to see some friends from my other job at St. Paul's Girls who have come out on a valuable Sunday night before a Monday morning. So very much appreciated. That was a piece by J.S. Bach called Pièce d'Orgue, which is a French title for those of you who are into languages. And it's because he wrote it in a kind of French style, but through the mirror of J.S. Bach. I don't have my program with me, but I do have the music here, so I know what. Oh, you have the program. Brilliant, great. So I do know what I'm going to play. The next piece is a prelude on a pretty well-known German hymn. Well-known in Bach's time anyway. Allein Gott in der Höhe sei which is a transcription or a paraphrase, I guess, of the Gloria in Excelsis. And he wrote quite a lot of this. He really liked this tune. It starts dum, deem, dum, da. It's got that 1, 3, 4, 5. And he uses it in different ways. In this one, it's like a really long meditation on the tune. It's quite hard to recognize the tune, but it is there at the beginning. And it says something, I think, about trying to climb up the ladder of grace, maybe, and falling back down again. See if you can hear it in the way that the music opens. You're very kind. That last piece was by Dietrich Buxtehude, who was organist of St. Mary's in Lübeck, and Bach walked the several hundred miles, or was it several hundred? I think it was, or at least it was over 100 miles between where he was at school in St. Michael's, Lüneburg, to Lübeck to listen to Buxtehude play. And the thing about the job at Lübeck was that you had to marry your predecessor's daughter. Bach never became the organist of St. Mary's Lübeck, and I don't know whether it was anything to do with Buxtehude's daughter. But it's obviously, I don't know, I thought as if they were both looking down on the concert, maybe Bach would have some small dissatisfaction that his very quiet piece got an instant round of applause, and his the person whose job he wanted, very loud piece, didn't get any applause. So that's quite good. The next piece we're going to just a little suite of pieces by Louis-Nicolas Clérambault. He's a French organist, and those of you who were hoping for the suite de premier ton, I'm really sorry. I think this is the suite de deuxième ton. No, this is the suite de premier ton. I think. I can't remember. I'm playing something different, but it's still a suite by Clérambault. And the deuxième ton is very much the same as the premier ton. It just cadences on a different note. So those of you who really wanted to cadence on the modal final, I'm very, very sorry. But it's still good music. This French organ tradition is still very much based on improvisation. But before the 19th century, and certainly before the French Revolution, the French organ tradition was based on the organist playing in place of the choir. So they had a slightly different job. If you can imagine, like a psalm, for example, the choir might sing verse 1, and then instead of singing verse 2, the organist would improvise something. And then the choir would sing verse 3. So nobody ever had the text of verse 2. It was just kind of assumed. Maybe they read it or something, and the organist played, and it gets more and more, and as French organs got more and more dramatic and technologically advanced, the music gets more and more kind of secular and fun, and obviously that couldn't last very long, and there was all sorts of papal edicts against doing it, and you're definitely not allowed to do it now. However, it certainly was the case in 17th century France. For those people who didn't want to improvise, the reason that they improvised it so much is they had to do so many services that there wasn't the paper, there was just like the printing technology wasn't there. But if you didn't want to improvise it, the leading organists of France started to write down how you might improvise. I'm not going to sing any psalm verses in between or anything else, but potentially there will be breaks between the pieces whilst I re-register. And maybe you can imagine your favorite psalm verse in the second tone, not the first tone, in the second psalm tone. Okay, enjoy. Thank you. And then I guess if we were in France in the 17th century, we'd go on to Psalm 2, et cetera, through the service. The next couple of pieces are by Ignatius Sancho, quite an amazing figure, really, born as an enslaved person on a slave ship at sea, on a British slave ship, and grew up in Grenada before being trafficked to Britain, escaping from his first captors, going into the service of the Duke of Montagu, who taught him to read. He became a businessman. He had a shop. He was a published writer and a published composer, and was the second person of African descent to vote in a British parliamentary election. So yeah, he did a lot of things. It's quite nice in this Black History Month to remember that part of musical history. These small minuets are very much a kind of domestic set of pieces, so possibly not something that you, well, I don't know, so maybe you wouldn't have heard it in church, maybe you would, but definitely not designed for liturgical use, unlike a lot of the other music that we've heard. So two kind of very intimate minuets by the incredible Ignatius Sancho. There you go. That was a good exercise in audience management. And yeah, there were two, but I played them side to side. So yeah, thank you. Anyway, the last The last piece is a big bit of Bach, a prelude and fugue in C. Starts off in 9/8, an unusual meter for Bach to write his big organ preludes in. Some people speculate that there might be a theological idea behind it to do with the incarnation, because the music keeps doing this dum-deem, dum-deem, dum-da. It keeps coming down from above. But then it also starts going from below to the top. So who knows whether that's right or not, but you can have your own interpretation. And then the fugue is this really extraordinary bit of Bach at his most Bach-y, really. It starts off relatively innocuously and then gets into all sorts of chromatic trouble. And then he brings in the pedals with the same tune, but going at half the speed of the tune that he brought in at the beginning. It does. I'm really selling it, aren't I? It's quite a good piece. He was quite a complicated guy. I guess Buxtehude's daughter dodged a bullet there, didn't she? Anyway, here we are. This is the Prelude and Fugue in C by J.S. Bach. Honestly, thank you very much. Honestly, I wasn't joking. There's like lots and lots of rests after the final note, which is really short. So we assume from like the fact that ink was expensive that he meant it to be like the last note. So I'm sorry if you thought I was taking the mickey out of J.S. Bach. I really wasn't. That's what he wrote. Thank you very much for your lovely audience. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
What a wonderful performance. Just a quick heads up about the next 2 weeks. We have Beatrice Nicholas with us next week. I think she's been our most regular performer. She is the best pianist you'll ever hear. And she is also just this ray of light. Like, talking to her, you just feel better about the world. Like, you kind of want to be her friend. She's so charming and lovely. She's performed many things here. She did Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, many other things, and she is wonderful. So you must come next week because she is great. The week after that, we have Aaron, and I would say that the brass section is my least favorite section of the orchestra, but he makes me love the trumpet. He is the most awesome trumpeter you will ever hear. So the next 2 weeks are going to be wonderful, and you will be missing out if you don't come, because they're really great people. They both performed here regularly before, and I look forward to them tremendously. But wonderful to hear this music, this organ playing the music that it was designed to play. Tremendous performance. And let's give a final big thank you to Joe for tonight. Wonderful.